Right, well, welcome to Aletheia this month. We have a very interesting topic, Christianity and mental health, a topic that unfortunately isn't really discussed often enough, I don't think, certainly in our community and probably in the general community as well. I think statistically, pretty much all of us sitting in this church tonight would have someone that they know, a relative, a friend, a workmate, a neighbour, who is or has gone through some mental health issues. And yet, if you were to just listen to people's general way of talking about things, you would almost think that, that never happens. What does that mean for the Christian? Can a Christian suffer mental health issues? Statistically speaking, yes, obviously, we can. How does the Christian deal with it? How does it fit in our faith? The Christian is meant to be happy. Can a Christian get depression? A Christian is meant not to worry about tomorrow. Can a Christian be anxious? So today we're very lucky to have an expert to guide us. I think I'm probably pretty well justified in using that term today, because with us is Dr. Graham Barker, who's very kindly agreed to join us for the second time, by the way, at Aletheia. He attended a meeting with us, I can't remember how many years ago now, 2 or 3, 4, something 15. Like that. 15. Some years ago he was on a panel that we held, but today we have him just by himself, all to ourselves. He's a clinical psychologist with additional qualifications in education, theology and counselling. He's done lots of his study over in America at various institutions and has been a teacher, a pastor, a youth worker, an academic and the director of the Shiloh Centre. And he spent 20 years as the inaugural head of the Wesley Institute Graduate School of Counselling. And today, if the internet is correct, he mostly focuses on the supervision of clinicians, and apparently I think has a passion for supervising and nurturing and mentoring good young psychologists and counsellors. And he also is involved with the Youth for Christ International Member Care Program. He's co-authored several books, including a children's book with his daughter Rebecca, which I now want to look up and read. I'm sure it will be fascinating. And I also discovered in my trawling through the internet, trying to find stuff to say, that he and I have 3 things in common. We both have beards. We both go for the Dragons. And we went to the same high school. So what a small world. So we're very happy to welcome today Dr. Graham Barker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Antonius, although that's a beard. If we have a little trouble getting this across, you've got to blame me. But it is an interesting topic to address, because it's not one that, as Father Antonius has said, it's not one that's openly discussed. In fact, Christianity and mental illness have had a rather checkered history. We're going to look at some of that history tonight. Sometimes there's been mutual support, but other times it's been very combative. We've got seats down the front here, they're no more expensive.
So I might just move that a bit closer to you, make it easier.
Thank you. And I guess the questions that most people have within the realm of Christendom fall into 2 questions, 2 issues. Does mental illness actually exist, or is it just a sign of spiritual failing? In other words, are you actually mentally ill, or is there some spiritual lacking in your life? It's been one of the questions down through the centuries that the church has had to address. If it is a reality, then do we need to do anything other than pray and read the scriptures in order to be healed? And there are many people that hold to that. In fact, a little bit later I'll talk about a survey that said a vast percentage of American Christians believe that you should just read the scriptures and pray to get over your depression, your anxiety, or if you have something more severe, you just need to pray more, or read the scriptures more. In other words, if you are suffering from mental illness, it's due to the fact that you are not practicing your faith, or you do not have enough. So these have been two big issues. Does it really exist? And if it does, can Christendom speak into it? And some people say yes. All you have to do is pray and read the scriptures. There may be some tonight that hold that. Well, let's see where we go with it. A recognition of the fact that there's been mental issues and mental health issues that people grapple with goes back quite a way. The idea that there was mental illness is actually part of the Greek philosophy that precedes the Roman Empire. We're talking 3 or 4 centuries before Christ, that there was a strong emphasis on the mental condition of the people. So it's not a new thing. One of the early orthodox Christians distinguished between mental illness and demonic possession, which is still a little bit of a sticky point today. Before the time of Christ, Greek physicians, they treated mental illness, but they had many sorts of treatment that the Christians adopted. We'll talk about those as well. But the church fathers routinely refer to medical treatment for those that we would call insane or they thought were just crazy, without any sense of disapproval. So when we're talking now that back in the church father time, we're talking in the first few centuries after Christ, they began to treat mental illness, not seeing everything as demonic. And that's a big significant thing. You remember Jesus and the Gadamonian, the demonic? When he cast them out, cast out the demons into the pigs, and then the pigs ran into the water and were drowned. And Jesus got into a lot of trouble from the local pig butcher for killing off the whole population of pigs. But that wasn't the only issue they had to deal with. You know, if you read through the Gospels, there were many times when people came to Jesus with grief. They came to him with anxiety. His disciples were often very anxious people. He took them into places that they weren't very comfortable with, and he told them to go places that they balked at going to. And he had a gentle but persuasive way of dealing with them. Come right in. I guess cops are a bit like Baptists. They like the back. interestingly enough, while the church itself was ministering to a lot of folk with mental illness, there were a group of people, and we call them the early church apologists. These are the ones that were out defending the faith. And they were some of the most vocal in opposing the treatment of mental illness. Let me read you. Well, I think I put it up there. This is Tertullian, 150, 225, early church father. He railed against the whole idea of the church being involved in healing mental illness. This is what he said. What is there common between Athens and Jerusalem? In other words, between philosophy and faith. What between the academy and the church? What between heretics and Christians? You notice he started to put them together. Away with all such projects. He stopped any sort of communion with or development of a healing ministry in the church at that time. So we're talking 150 AD, and now we're in 2018, and some of this is still around. There are still those who say, away with any sort of medication, away with any sort of scientific inquiry, because what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? In the early centuries of the Middle Ages, they followed up until about 800, when Greek and Roman dualism dominated. Do I need to explain dualism? Okay, that's fine. I can explain it. It's great. Dualism says that the world is made up of two spheres. Over here, we have the physical, all the things that our senses can take in. The physical, usually encapsulated by the body. And that's bad. Over here, we've got the spiritual, our soul. And that is good. It came from a Greek understanding of their understanding of life, and often it's called Gnosticism. Where if you say that what happens in the body is bad and what happens in the mind and the spirit is good, then you have this rather bad dilemma, out of which came two major ideas. One was Stoicism, that said if you want to do anything, you have to basically beat the body into submission so that the mind can be let loose, or hedonism. Since the body doesn't count, you can do anything with it and enjoy it because it doesn't really matter as long as you keep your mind pure. Some people today adhere to that very strongly. The dualistic idea that somehow there is the sacred and there's the secular, somehow there's the bad physical and the good spiritual. And that was dominant in the Middle Ages. And it was the common philosophy amongst many of the clergy and the philosophers, often because they were holding to it. So did the people in the churches, the laity. So if you had a mental illness, there was something either organically wrong with you or you have done something bad spiritually. In fact, spiritual problems became, or rather, psychological or mental illness became spiritual problems. They were thought to be either the results of spells that came from witches and warlocks, or they constituted punishment for a performance of acts that displeased the gods. And for centuries, this stance prevailed. So if you had a mental illness, it meant that you've done something bad, that you have crossed over into the demonic, or that you have some really serious deficit in your spirituality. And that created problems. By the end of the first millennium, things were really heating up. Peter Damian, he was the Bishop of Ostia, a very influential cardinal, denounced any elevation of human reason or scientific investigation as unchristian. 2 centuries later, in the 13th century, Pope Alexander pronounced that clergy involvement in non-spiritual efforts such as healing and medicine were the devil's deception. We don't have a very good record in the church of dealing with people with mental illness. We've just given them all sorts of stigmas to overcome. We've added to their pain. There have been some voices. A couple of church fathers, familiar to many people, St. Augustine, some of you know him, and St. Jerome. These were all about the 5th century. They said that as long as you place a careful eye on what philosophy and science says, you can possibly use it. But their voice was drowned out by the end of the first millennium. So if you lived 1,000 years ago and you had depression or you were anxious, you'd be considered either to be under a spell or you've got very serious spiritual problems. I personally would not have liked to have been in that position. All of us sometimes feel anxious. Some of you get depressed quite often. 1,000 years ago would have been a very unpleasant experience for you to be a member of a Christian congregation. And unfortunately, in some places today, that still happens. Connecting mental illness with the supernatural or the demonic would in fact be considered by the early church as heretical. In fact, it didn't actually eventuate or have its origins in the church itself. It started with a cult. Asclepius. He's probably not someone you will encounter in your history lessons, but Asclepius had this healing cult where if you had a problem with your life, you would carve an image of it, right? So if you had a toothache, you'd bring you carve a wooden image of a toothache. If you had a headache, you'd bring model of a head, whatever, and you bring it to the temple of Asclepius, you would pay and give that model to the priest, and in your sleep, you would be healed. So people would come and sleep in the temple with their little objects representing their mental illness or their physical illness, and they'd be healed. Well, Asclepius had temples all over Greece, all over the Roman Empire. And I think that that's probably where a lot of the misunderstandings came from. Because in the early church, there were a lot of people who came in from those sorts of cults. And that issue, because it wasn't addressed appropriately, began to grow. I think I mentioned him up there. Yeah. Then along comes Bartholomew Anglicus, a 13th century Christian, who used what the scriptures had told us to use. Do you remember when King David got really depressed and angry? What did he call for? Or who did he call for? David and his harp. And David would play music, and Saul would be calmed down and relaxed. For a little while, often he'd be throwing spears at David, but when he got highly anxious and really depressed, David brought music in. And this was what Bartholomew prescribed for his depressed patients, and also gentle but firm binding for those that were frenzied, those that were agitated, those with ADHD, those that couldn't handle what was happening. And he would have them bound gently and bathed gently. This was rather radical in this world where everything was considered to be a spiritual disorder. But really since then the church has been vacillating. Do we treat mental illness as some sign of spiritual degradation? What have you done? What sins have you committed? Or do we see it as something that's the whole person's involved? Debate still continues. So if we bring it right up to today, there are really two groups within Christendom that debate this issue. There are those that I call reductionist, those that try and come up with one simple answer for the whole problem. They reduce mental illness down to two things: personal sin or organicity. If a person is mentally ill, it's because they've got a brain disease or they're experiencing a sinful life. So if you think about that, your anxiety, your depression, that could be that you have a brain tumour or some sort of brain disorder, or you're suffering punishment because of your sin. this is a very strong movement amongst Christians. And as Father Antonius says, Christians get depressed and anxious about the same statistic as non-Christians. So does that mean we've all got brain tumours? Or we're all being punished for our sin? But on the other side, there are what are called restorationists. Those who are trying to restore the original intent of Scripture, the original intent of creation. And those folk see the origins of mental illness in the broken relationships within and between all aspects of humanity. Your spirit, your soul, your body. Your mental illness is the result of some problem, some disruption in what's happening in your life, in your whole body. It's not just because you're sinful or you've got a problem with your brain cells. The restorationists believe that you can have mental illness coming from other people's sinfulness. You may have been abused as a child. You may have been defrauded as an adult. And whenever you have loss or major change, you have depression. Whenever you are facing something fearful, or you have a reminder of the past in something in the present, you may be anxious. Yes, there may be a faith involvement in that, but it's not the only aspect. You are not being punished. Now, of course, if you do something stupid, you are involved in taking illicit drugs and you're having hallucinations or you're having problems with your mind, then you are probably suffering the logical consequences or the natural consequences of your behaviour. But that's a small percentage of our population. Hopefully in the Christian kingdom, that's a smaller one. But there are many who are addicted within our communities. So you've got these two arguing sides of the story. The reductionists who say it's organicity or it's punishment. Others say no, it's because of the fracturedness, the brokenness of our lives. We'll get into that a little bit more. But before we go any further, we need to talk about what it is we're talking about. Like, what's mental illness? That's a question. How do you answer that? Is someone mentally ill because they follow Canterbury Bulldogs? I think they must be. Eh? Now, if you're a Dragons fan, you're good. How do you determine what mental illness is? And what is it? Because someone thinks differently to you? Someone believes differently? Someone drives a different car? Lives in a different suburb? Speaks a different language? What is it that says that they're mentally ill? Well, this debate's been going on for a while as well.
Is it a lack of fear?
The lack of fear. That'd be more like mental health.
No, they recognize mentally ill people by trying to scare them and they don't respond.
We've got a suggestion that mental illness is not having the response patterns. But who do you compare them to? Who do you compare them to? Let me tell you a story. You want a story? There was a very famous measurement to tell how far people were mentally ill. Right? It was called the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, mental inventory. And this was put together in the 1950s. And if you ever had someone who was seriously ill, they probably had to take an MMPI. About 500 questions. At the end of which they were all scored and you could get a diagnosis on what mental illness you had. But you see, in order to work out what mental illness looked like, they decided they would look at what a healthy population was. Right? So they had 5,000 inmates of a mental institutions across the US. They're the ones that put the deviations in, right? Guess who their control group, or guess who their normal population was? Their visitors. Their family. Their friends. All of the people they hung out with. Think about that. They're just probably the ones that weren't caught. And so 30 years later, or 40 years later, someone went back and looked at this and said, we can't ever use this again. Because we're saying that those that are mentally ill have different responses to this group who really don't have that much of a difference in their responses. So they had to redo it. They spent millions of dollars finding now a randomised sample of healthy people. But what's healthy? That's the question. Well, mental illness is a behaviour or mental pattern that causes significant distress or impairment of personal functioning. In other words, you don't function very well. Your personal levels of functioning fluctuate, or they don't match society's demands. Right? Then the World Health Organization decided to get a little more specific. And they defined it as a personal problem characterized by some combination of abnormal thoughts, abnormal emotions, and abnormal relationship with others. Folks, we're all mentally ill. Somewhere in there, we have a mental illness. Think about it. A personal problem characterized by a combination of abnormal thoughts. Well, what's normal thoughts? Abnormal emotions, abnormal behaviour and relationship with others. They're great at describing it, but they don't tell us what it is. You can relax. You're as normal as the person next to you. Don't look. But it does present a problem. What is mental illness? Society says if you behave this way, then you're mentally ill. But it may be cultural. What is culturally acceptable may be not acceptable in another culture. We're dealing with a very complex issue here, folks. Think about that. We'll try and come up with an answer. You better tell me when I'm running out of time here, Father. Doing all right?
Yeah. I don't have a
You don't have a watch?
You're doing well.
Good. Well, when the sun comes up, we're done. Okay, so let's go back to our original issue. Part of the Christian struggle is discerning the extent to which their spiritual lives interact with their mental health. Doesn't mean if you're a spiritual person, you're not going to be mentally deficient or having mental issues. How much is our physiological and our environmental aspects, how do they interact with our spirituality? So how much is spiritual and how much is external in our behaviours? Can mental illness be a punishment for sin or natural illness? We know from the Old Testament, the Old Testament book of Daniel, that Nebuchadnezzar, who was punished with a psychotic break, but to categorise all mental suffering as such would be a gross misunderstanding. And this is important now. When we consider from a Christian worldview, we understand that all suffering is the result of living in a fallen world. We live with the consequences of a fallen world. Fallen nature, you can blame Adam or you can blame Eve, or you can share the responsibility, but we live in a fallen world. Natural disasters. Tornadoes, tsunamis, all these things are not necessarily the result of personal sin. The natural world is struggling because of the fall. If we suffer from brokenness in our own being, the brokenness of others, and the brokenness of our environment. Sometimes it's not our own problems, it's other people's problems that impinge on us. We are all living in a fallen world and we have to deal with our own fallenness and everyone else's. As such, mental illness is not just a spiritual issue, it's also a natural consequence of living together in a fractured world. How would you go living on an island by yourself? How would you feel if someone else turned up on your island? How long would that last? You see? Depending who it was, you say. We need to see that as well as spiritual measures, there are beneficial and helpful medications and treatments are available. I mentioned a study. In 2013, that's not long ago, a research study found that half of US evangelical Christians believe prayer and Bible study alone can heal mental illness without the aid of medical or psychological intervention. That scares me. God can miraculously intervene and He can right the imbalances in our chemical relationships within our brain and our body, And he's done it many times. And he can do the same for a broken leg. Yet virtually everyone goes to a doctor for a broken leg. We don't expect God to heal our broken legs just by prayer and Bible study. He can do it. And he has done it. But it's not the way he normally works. He has given us the gifts of medication, psychological treatments, community. Community is one of the greatest healing gifts that God has given us. To be able to share, to grieve together, to celebrate together. But we have to be willing to share our pain as well as our celebrations. A deep-seated belief that somehow seeking help for mental illness can not only pit Scripture against modern science, but it can also marginalise the countless Christians who, along with their friends and families, struggle with these issues. Think about that. If you believe that medical or psychological help for mental illness is unbiblical, then you're not only putting Scripture up against science, you're condemning a lot of people to a lot of pain. The church and mental illness have had a checkered past and they've got a checkered present. Unfortunately, the more we hold things back from each other, the more pain we suffer alone. Scripture says, confess to each other. Share your pain. It's the beginning of healing. We better... How are we doing? It's 7:15. How are we doing? We're doing good? All right, good. I'll take it off and put it in my pocket. The more Christians struggle with how to deal with mental illness, the more we fail to create a safe and healthy environment in which to discuss and deal with these issues. As a result, many of our Christian churches, our homes and our institutions just continue to promote mistrust, guilt and shame. There's this idea that mental health and psychology were somehow invented by pagans. It's not necessarily true. Ironically, most of our misconceptions come from that cult of Asclepius. But let me talk to you a little bit here about what I think is the reasoning behind our understanding of what mental illness is about in our lives. That it's rooted in Scripture. First of all, because a man's fall from his original created condition, my body's chemistry, its physics, and its electricity are damaged. Because my brain uses physical structure, like my electrical connections and chemistry, therefore I use them to process my perceptions, my thoughts and my emotions. You following? Because our bodies, our chemistry and every part of us has been affected by the fall of man, and they're the things we use to process thought and emotions, my brain's ability to process these functions will be impaired to the extent that it's affected by the fall. See, the first one, step one, is a biblical principle. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're all sinners. We all have a fallen nature. Consequently, the scientific facts are that part of the brain that's been affected is what you use. That's how you process your thoughts, what you see, how you respond to them, your emotions. It's all the chemicals and electrical impulses in your brain that do that. And if you've got a fallen brain, it's not going to work properly. And consequently, my brain's ability to process these functions will be impaired to the extent that I've fallen. If a person's depressed, they think poorly about themselves, poorly about their situation, and have little hope for the future. Why is that? Chemically, it's because they have lost the functioning of the serotonin in their brain. What causes the loss of serotonin? Any major change or major loss in their life will bring a loss of serotonin. Most antidepressants today help the serotonin in your brain work better. Is that unbiblical? No. You don't want to stay on it the rest of your life. That's why you have to work through what are the losses and the changes that you're struggling with. And that's where prayer, Bible study, counsel can really help. But you must be in community. You must feel like you're loved and accepted. And no matter what happens to you, no matter how impaired you feel, you're still going to be loved and accepted. That will bring the serotonin up. You ever seen a depressed monkey? No, because they eat lots of bananas. And you know the main ingredient in bananas? Serotonin. Now don't take that literally. But it's an illustration that serotonin can be replenished. It takes love, acceptance, a whole bunch of things that we use in psychology to get them up there. Or you can go and get it through a medication from an SSRI or something that's going to replenish that serotonin. But your chemistry in your brain determines your responses in life. It lost its hat. There are three additional constructs to contend with here. The first is that the brain acts as a bridge between our spiritual and physical worlds. I am getting a little dualistic here, so just hang on a minute. Our physical world, soul and body, in a way that no other body part does. Your brain is the connection between your spirit and the rest of you, who you are. The brain is the most complex organ in our body. And just as all the areas of my body, any sort of damage to the brain can be aggravated by a number of factors. So if we go back to step one, we live in a fallen world, but what else can happen? Let's have a look at it. We can have influences outside our control, our genes. They say if you want to avoid a heart attack, choose your parents very wisely. Well, you could say the thing about a lot of mental illness. Genes, brain injury, aging, that's not true. Abuse, shock, or you could get something like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. In other words, these are factors outside of your control that are going to affect your brain. Personal sin, in which is my responsibility, like substance abuse or a deliberate choice to refuse to obey God and his warnings. Or factor C, direct divine intervention. God in his sovereignty may impact my brain processes to affect his purposes. And I put in a couple of people there. He did that to Pharaoh, did to Cyrus, and he did it to Judas. Got them to think in a certain way to achieve his purposes. So, damage to my brain because of the fall can be affected by all these other environmental issues as well. Now, I'm going to conclude by giving you the often missed part of the puzzle. We have various measures to determine how far from normality we are. Well, my question is, how do we determine what normality is? May I suggest 5 factors from the life of Jesus? If you can check these off, you don't need serotonin, you don't need diazepam, you probably don't even need to go to your counsellor next week. Unfortunately, I can't tick all of these. I don't think everybody else will. 1, Jesus had a realistic view of self. He didn't overestimate or underestimate who he was. He didn't need to find out from anyone else. Don't you love some of the ads? You deserve this. Without it, you're a nobody. You need to drive this car, wear this perfume, whatever. Jesus didn't need that. He knew who he was. He didn't need affirmation from outside. He possessed sound boundaries. I just put a couple in there. He was able to balance work and rest. He was always going off into the mountains to pray and rest. He didn't work 24 hours a day. He walked a lot. Good boundaries. He knew where he stopped and someone else started. He didn't have an enmeshed relationship. He had close relationships. We know he's very close with 3 of the guys, and the other 9 hung around as well, and there was 120 and there was 500. But he had close relationships. He had close relationships with his mother and his family. Remember on the cross he said to John, take care of my mother. Close relationships. He didn't smother them, they didn't smother him. He participated in community. He went to weddings, he went to funerals, shared meals, all those things that we do. But he did them because he was serving, not taking. And he possessed an internal locus of control. I just threw that in. But what it means is that he was able to self-regulate his emotions. He was able to process his own thoughts. He didn't copy anyone just for the sake of getting what they had. There was no envy, there was no jealousy. He was able to regulate himself. That's the model for what mental health is from a Christian perspective. If there's things that are wrong there, good prayer and Bible study will show you where you are in error. And if you are struggling with any of those things, so you go back to the original World Health Organization, in other words, you've got behavioural, emotional, or thoughts that are abnormal, then you need to come and see Father Antonius and he'll cure you. He would probably assess whether you need to go and see a psychiatrist, psychologist, or your GP, whatever, or whether you just need to be wrapped in the arms of the community and held. There's a terrible story in this in the scriptures about a young girl who was gang raped. And for years I thought, why didn't they get some help for her? Then I reread it and said they brought her back into the family and held her. That's what it was needed. Terrible situation. But in the wisdom, they brought her back into the family and cared for her. You're a community of caring people. Care for those that are suffering. Care for those that have so-called mental illness. There's something happened in their life as a result of either being a fractured person, living with other fractured people, or living in a world that's fractured. Until Jesus returns, we've got a fractured world. Questions? Yes, all right on cue.
Sorry, we might take the questions till you finish.
Oh, I'm done. Let me just say this, one last thing. I want you to think of a triangle. Divide it into three. 1, 2, 3. Spiritual, psychological, physical. Now invert it. And that's the way when people come to me and they have been suffering some mental illness, first of all, I would look at the physical. Is it a matter of a brain tumour? Or is it a matter of bad eating? Bad posture? You can get terrible, terrible nightmares and dreams from having a bad neck. What is it that's physical? You eliminate that, then we go to the psychological issues. What are their losses? What are their fears? Maybe there's something in their family that's a secret that is driving them mad because they can't believe it or they can't hang on to it any longer. All of those go, then we look at what is happening in their spiritual life. You don't go there first. You don't go and say, oh, they're demonically, possessed. That'd be the last thing on the list you want to check. Go down the list. Seek God's guidance as to where that person is. That's the way I work. That's the way we need to think about it, I believe. Here endeth the lesson. Question?
Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, no. Father Antonius is going to vet the questions.
Yes, so I'm going to Stephen's ability. So we have an opportunity now for questions. Please don't be shy to ask. Number one, Aletheia is a place where you can ask anything at all that you like. That is our one rule. You can ask anything you like, without judgment, without fear, without shame. The only rule is you must be courteous, and I'm sure you will be. And I'm going to add a little sub-rule today also, because we have a lot of people in the church, which is if we can please keep our questions brief and succinct. Please think about the question you want to ask and put it as simply and clearly as you can. To keep some order, if you could please come up. There's a couple of empty pews down the side here. If you'd like to come along and come and ask a question at the microphone so everybody can hear it. And we'll try and get through as many as we can. So I think we have our first question.
Just on the note, when you said care for them, bring them, embrace them, love them, how can we do so if they're hiding it or keeping it a secret or being shy about it because of this stigma?
It's a great question, and it really depends on those that are closest to them that know these things that are happening. In other words, if that person is withdrawing from fellowship or they're keeping to themselves and you know it, then those that are closest to them need to be willing to risk that relationship by asking. Majority of people don't know, but those that are close would know, hey, they've been missing. Or, I went round the house and they haven't been looking after themselves, take a risk and ask. If you think there's real damage been occurring, then you might need to call a mental health team. But what the scripture says is you go by yourself, you ask them. If they don't respond, you take the pastor with you or the father with you and you confront them. So you've got a witness. But yeah, don't let those things slip by. Because if you are observant about each other and you notice that there's things that are out of whack with someone, put your arm around them and say, hey, I noticed you're not yourself. What's happening? Don't be afraid of that. You know, they may deny it. You may have to keep going back. But that's what community does. You don't give up. Keep knocking on the door saying, hey, we're here if you need us. Because it may be the shame that's keeping them from coming forward. But if they know that you love them and you won't judge them, they'll be more willing, I think, to come forward. Sir?
I have two questions, two brief questions. First question is anxiety and depression a form of sin?
Is anxiety and depression a form of sin?
Of sin, yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, it's possible but not probable. Depression usually comes from a loss. Oh, I need to come up closer? Okay, I just stood up here. So,
Just worried about the people at the back.
depression usually comes from a series of losses or a major loss, major change. If that's a loss of integrity, you could call that a spiritual issue. But generally, it's a loss of personal relationship, changes in the environment of like jobs and so on. Anxiety, that's usually... Depression tends to come from the past, things we've lost. Anxiety is the anticipation of loss. I'm going to lose my life. Someone's going to break in. I'm going to lose my fortune. Whatever it is. But we have this fear of loss. Or the fear of something bad is going to happen. Now, Philippians 4 gives us a whole bunch of things we can do for anxiety. But it never says that it's sinful. See, when we get depressed, it's usually because we've had a loss and we're angry about the loss and we stuff the anger inside us. And that becomes what Scripture calls the root of bitterness. And that can cause sin. But it's usually not the beginning of it.
So it depends on how you react to it.
Depends what it is you're reacting to.
Yeah.
Not just your reaction, but what is the object that's creating that. Yeah. So it can be sin, but generally it's not. It's a normal reaction because we're fractured. We don't, we want to know the answers to everything. We wouldn't be anxious if we knew, well, probably we would, if we knew what was going to happen tomorrow, but it's the wanting to know that's more sinful than the actual anxiety. Yeah. Thank you. Good questions.
Second question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Is back on depression and anxiety, is that a form of bearing your cross?
Paul talks about being willing to bear your cross for Christ's sake. If it's for your, and it's a bit like suffering for Jesus, right? But if you're suffering because of your own stupidity, that's not bearing the cross. So, can a person be depressed and find that that's bearing their cross? That's possible. We know Paul had the thorn in his side. that he prayed continuously to have it removed, and the Lord never did, because it kept him focused on the Lord for keeping that pride away. Yes, except that Scripture tells us we're to be whole. Our goal is to be whole and be able to serve and be a witness and an example to others. So if we're going to be whole, it means spiritually, emotionally, physically, the whole package. So I don't see depression as bearing the cross. Maybe for a little while, but not as a major reason. It's usually the effects of some loss and repressed anger in our lives.
Is your back okay?
Sorry, Chris, what?
Is your back okay? Holding your back. Would you like to get a chair?
No. His mother here.
Okay.
I'm not that old.
No, you're holding your back.
I just had somewhere to put my hand. I didn't want to put it in my pocket. That's rude.
So my question is, you touched upon this, and I think previous questions touched upon it. I would like a little bit more detail, if that's okay. You mentioned in your talk that we should confess our pain, and that is the beginning of healing. Mm-hmm. We've also touched upon that the Coptic community, or community like ours, is predominantly shame-based. We don't like to come out with things like that, and I think some Christians touched upon that, and they asked you how to do that. I'm more asking, what, in your opinion, or your view, or your experience, are the defences that are limiting us as a community to really fully embrace the truth about mental illness? In those shame-based type of communities, what are the defences? Because we need to identify them, I think, before we can tackle them. Thank you.
Do you understand the question? She's saying, in what way does the Coptic community hide its shamefulness and its mental illness? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I'm asking for what are those defences?
Yeah, well, that's the way they're hiding. Yeah. Well, I don't think there are any particular Coptic defences. I think Christendom in general doesn't like to confess its brokenness because we have been severely influenced by the culture that says we are somehow less or somehow degraded if we are not perfect.
Oh, okay.
And so we pretend that we're perfect, or we pretend that we don't have a problem. Because if we were to say we were having a problem, then we'd be vulnerable to other people's criticism, other people's judgment, But the more we're able to say it, I wrote a book a number of years ago called Unloading the Overload. And in there, about chapter 5, I talk about my 3 years experience with anxiety. I spent 6 months in a rocking chair looking at a brick wall for 6 months. Try it. You'll get depressed. I was afraid to walk. I was having so many panic attacks. I was afraid to walk. I thought I'd die. My community came around and they said, put on your track shoes. We're going for a walk. No, I'm going to die. They said, well, better to die out there than in here. So come on. And gradually we walked to the corner and back and then around the block and then started to jog And another, 6 months later, I was doing pretty well. And 3 years later, I never had a panic attack since, and that was 1981. And I've been able to tell that story. I mean, I've got another hour, I'd tell you what it was really about, but that story has made more people say, hey, I've had that too. See, I mean, if we just crack open the door and say it's normal, we're all fractured, we all need to know and care for each other, people aren't afraid. But if we all present together, no one's afraid to come out and go, well, look, here I am. There was a wonderful book written by a Catholic father, John Powell. It's called, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? And he said this, if I got up here tonight and I was naked, how would you feel? Would you feel ashamed for me? You may be repulsed by what you see, but he said no, because we ought to be willing to stand before each other emotionally naked and go, I feel terrible, I feel sad, I feel, we celebrate when things are good. Can we embrace when things are bad? And so, perfectionism, just keeping a face of performance. We call it the Napoleonic. Well, it's basically based on Napoleon. Yeah, there's a little fella, conquered all of Europe. Well, we got that name for the people that overachieve because they're afraid of failing. And that's sometimes what we do. We take on more. We say, well, I can't say I can't do it because what will people think? And so we take on more. And what happens is we put more pressure on ourselves and other people rather than going, hey, I'm small. I can reach this far, but I can't reach up there. So let me do stuff at this level. Otherwise this Napoleonic complex will just turn us into overachieving, short-lived corpses.
Thank you.
Come around. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about the causes of mental illness that you talked about.
Yep.
You said that there was there are damaged things in Earth, in our environment, as well as within us due to the fall.
Yeah.
And then those things then can cause mental illness.
And we live in a fractured society, so other people's sinfulness can affect us.
So my question is that with only some individuals experiencing mental illness, wouldn't it make more logical sense that it's those fractures in society that are experienced unevenly between people that are causing that experience, as opposed to having an overarching fallen state? Or else, if there was an overarching fallen state, wouldn't that mean that we all would experience different levels of mental illness and we would all go through that? So
you're right, we do. It's a spectrum. We all experience it. Depends how you do actually define it again. See, no one knows your thought life except you and God. But the majority of it would be abnormal. Things like envy and jealousy and lust, all those things are abnormal thoughts. They're not the way you were designed. So are you mentally ill because you have it? If it's manifesting in behaviours and emotions that are incongruent with your true beliefs. So I would say that everybody somehow is on that spectrum of mental illness. But my main point would be, you said there's a group of people that really are suffering from it. That's true. You see, the problems we face are never the real problem. The problems we face are just symptoms. The real problem is how we cope with them. And that's where I think that Christians, because the Holy Spirit indwells us, we have the power of God, we have the Word to give us guidance, we are better equipped to cope with things. Doesn't mean we're immune from them. So I think that having the Christian community and our faith being built up helps us cope better. Doesn't mean we're immune. So, is that the St. George or is that the New Orleans Saints?
No, I'm a St. George supporter too, so...
Okay, all right.
But this is a nice hockey team in Liverpool.
Oh, Liverpool Saints.
I'd rather be here, it's probably warmer in an ice cream.
That's all right, that's all right.
I did have one question, but just bouncing off that, I don't know if I would put it based on the definition that you put up before, that count jealousy and things like that as a mental...
No, I'm saying that they're abnormal thoughts.
Yeah, I would say they're normal thoughts.
Yeah, that's right. Why are they normal thoughts? Because we're fallen people. It wasn't the way we were intended originally.
Well, this probably comes into my other question because I'm not religious, so I don't really believe in a fallen world. And I guess I can explain psychological illness and traits like jealousy and things with something like evolution, our evolutionary history. And I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure what your thoughts are on evolution, but I assume that if you accept evolution is true, that if that can explain all of these patterns of thought behaviours and patterns of thought that have a negative impact on our life, if that can be explained by evolution, what's the value of putting it back to something like before? And isn't there a certain inherent risk with saying that it's not just something that's an evolved trait that we can treat with physical symptoms, like that we can get infected with the virus, say, it's exactly the same as that. Isn't there some type of inherent risk with connecting it through the brain and spirituality? Because I think you're on, I really like kind of where you're going with this talk tonight, that people should seek help for mental illness, right? That's a great message, but I can see a little bit of a danger in your message by connecting it through spirituality in the brain when it can possibly be all explained by evolutionary history.
I mean, there's valid points there. My question is, if we're evolving in an evolutionary process, how come we're so screwed up now?
Well, I don't see it's screwed up, or I think that's a misunderstanding of evolution. Is not really about getting better, right? It's about,
it's selective, isn't it?
It's about fitting a niche, and sometimes organisms fit niches and develop traits that can be negative for them as well. So
second law, yeah, I understand.
For instance, like it could be jealousy, right? Jealousy could drive us to bond with a mate. So we could have our population selected for, and jealousy could be a trait that gets selected for in our population. That explains why lots of people experience jealousy. Now, if jealousy becomes such a problem that it impacts your cognitive function and your ability to live a happy life, we would call that a mental illness. Now, I'm great that people go and seek help for mental illness. Yeah. We should treat mental illness, but I can see a problem with not just accepting it as a general kind of trait that we're involved with, like any other disease that we could possibly be susceptible to, and connecting it to spirituality. Because if you make that connection to spirituality, then surely you're opening that door for people to say, I won't go and see a psychologist about it, when we really should be pushing them.
Sure, you're going to, I mean, if you're, as you are, a materialistic, naturalistic reductionist,
those words don't always strike me.
But I'm saying, that's where you're coming from. It's like being a reductionist. Someone says, well, if it's a spiritual issue only, I'll go and see Father, or I'll go and get help from above. I think they're both incorrect.
Yeah.
See? But from my perspective, right, from a Christian perspective, the struggles with what I would call the more negative or damaging emotions are just symptomatic of our nature that says, I'm selfish, I want what everybody else has got that's better than mine, and they are spiritual problems. They're just, I don't think they're just evolutionary problems. It does not explain the big picture. But I really appreciate your question.
I'll sit down.
Okay. You made it.
Yeah, I understand prayer and Bible reading is imperative to get closer to Jesus. But sometimes things happen like it's outside of our control, like cancer or a loss of a job or a family breakdown.
Yep.
How do we hold that cross and carry it with joy until we pass away through it?
Well, when Paul says, we, count all things.
As in, I want a practical example, a practical method of, I know prayer and Bible reading, but what else can we do?
Give me a specific.
Is it a character trait, or is it something just from faith and experience with Jesus that we actually learn to build it, or that's what I'm trying to ask you. Is it just through prayer and Bible reading that we get to that level where we can carry the joy, or?
No, I think if you are embracing all of Scripture, you're not going to be satisfied with a pain or a disease or something and saying, well, I've been blessed. All is joyful. I think the whole aspect of what Scripture's saying is you can be joyful in that. But it's not, we're never going to be free of that till eternity. But in the process, we can become more whole. We can become greater functioning with community, with medicine, with psychology. We don't have to settle for, I'm a martyr. All right? We don't need to have that mental attitude, I'm going to have to carry this cross. Because that's not what... I come to give you life and I give it to you abundantly, says Jesus.
One second. There's actually a saint in our church called who actually...
Say that again?
There's a saint in our church who's called who actually prayed for cancer.
Yep.
So, given the relevance there, how do you relate to that? He actually wanted to carry that cross for a better place in heaven.
Well, I would have a problem with that on a number of levels, but what I would say is that you cannot take an anecdotal experience and generalize it out. If that was his calling, then he had to follow through on it. But it's not an example for everybody. Now, if you pray to the saints and you pray for that person to give you courage or healing for that cancer, that's a calling you need to follow through on. But it's not a generalisation that that's everybody's experience.
I'm not saying myself, I'm just saying that there are certain saints in our church that actually pray for a massive cross so they get a greater place in heaven. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's anecdotal, right? That's one person for that calling. And that's fine. But you can't generalise. You want to pick that up, Father?
Sorry to jump in. I think that Warren Short Cameron's a really interesting case, but my understanding is he wasn't praying for cancer because he wanted it to make him a saint and get into heaven. He actually served a lot of people who had cancer, and out of his love and empathy for them, he wanted to experience what they were experiencing so that he could better serve them. That would be my understanding.
Yeah, it's a bit like Father Damien, right? Yeah. And the lepers.
And I think there is actually a line of thinking in our theology that says it is actually wrong to ask for more temptations, because that's a kind of pride. That's kind of saying, I'm strong enough to handle these big temptations. I think humility would dictate that we say, lead us not into temptation. And that's how I understand Father Short. Sorry to jump in.
Thank you. That's enlightening. Good question.
You solved it.
Yeah.
He solved it. Good on you. That's fine.
So you spoke about the importance of community to support us through mental illness. My question is, what do we do if the mental illness is a result of our community and the mentality of our community and the mentality of our family and the culture that we live in? Sorry, I had to say it.
Okay, you get that? How does a community support someone whose mental illness is actually a result of being in the community? The first thing is that you openly share what the problem is. And you don't participate in the secrecy that may be part of the community. All right? Now, you can't blame the community for everything, right? But you may be part of a solution by just saying, hey, I suffer from bipolar disorder, or I suffer from schizophrenia or something, and I'm taking these meds, but I need your support. That may shock some people out of their hidden problems. But I'd say the first thing is just make it open. We are to share one another's burdens. We are to share a love as well as the pain. And I can't speak about what it is that facilitates that dysfunction in the Coptic community, but if it's like any other Christian thing, it's unchristian to be sick with mental illness, and it's not. It's not. We're part of a bigger community called humanity.
I apologise, I already answered this. Why do we have biblical commandments to not worry, be peaceful, joyful, and mentally healthy if mental illness is out of our hands, just like getting cancer or breaking your bone?
That's a good question. You've got to be careful. There's a number of different ways that the idea of anxiety is presented in Scripture. There's two Greek words that are used. One says, be concerned about the welfare of other people. Be concerned. Other says, don't be concerned about, your clothes and what you're going to wear. They're two different Greek words, meaning two different things. But in the Scriptures, they're interpreted the same. Do not be concerned or. So we are mandated to show concern for those things like injustice and the inhumanity of man to man. But we aren't to show concern for those things out of our control. We are to commit them to the fact that we have a sovereign God who can take care of those things. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
I think you answered it. I just made a connection between mental illness versus breaking a bone or getting cancer.
Yeah, but there's certain things that we can do. You want to keep your serotonin up? Then live honestly with yourself and with your community. Don't hold in, if you're going to hold in emotion, you're going to get sick. Share, love, care, complain. Let it out and be healthy.
In our church, we have many services in different areas. I was just wondering what your view is in terms of having a service specifically for people with mental health in the church and how we go about doing that.
Get that? Having services specifically with people with mental illness. We'd all have to turn up. I would put that into the same situation as people who have physical disability. There may be some advantage in having that sense of community. We're all sharing in our issues. But why isolate them? Why not embrace them as part of your regular community? You may have a special day or a special service where you make an effort to, address those issues or bring those people to notice. But I wouldn't isolate them or marginalise them by saying, well, you can only come, we're doing this for you. Don't come to us. I know it's not, you're not saying that. I would dissuade a church from having a service just for those that are mentally ill. I think that is just adding to their stigma. I'd be embracing them, because it's a continuum. And you may have different parts or different things in the service that you can use. In our church, we have a lady who is severely intellectually impaired, but she reads perfectly. And so she will read the scriptures sometimes for us. Beautiful. And that inclusion is very important for her and for us. Is that it? Last question? Oh no, we've still got a row to go.
This one's going to be a little bit controversial. So I was raised in a fundamentalist Pentecostal stay away from medication. Part of it as well was both me and my brother were shipped off to conversion therapy as teenagers with Living Waters, which used to be an organisation here. It was loosely associated with Exodus International. For those that don't know, it's an ex-gay treatment, and I use that term very loosely. The government's been discussing at the moment the fact that churches have severely hurt the LGBT community to the point where certain people have committed suicide. Should the government, number one, crack down on churches that continue to stigmatise gay people to the point where they throw themselves in front of the bus? And secondly, what is the church going to do with the fact that both myself, even though I am married, but I have had my own journey, and other people that I'm very well close to who won't even set foot in the church now because when they share, you talk about sharing your struggles with the community. Well, in my community, because I'm bi, if you share your concerns in an orthodox church, they'll throw rocks at you. In Russia, they'll kill you. When the local gay pride walked around in Russia, the monks came out and beat them. So, I'm not being hostile towards you. I'm just saying in orthodoxy, LGBT is something that's not discussed, and if it is, it's shushed. But up until the 1970s, I think it was, the mental health list removed homosexuality. But that stigma of homosexuality being a mental illness still exists in this community and in many other Christian communities. And I guess what I'm wanting to ask is, what do you think the church should do about that and about the damage that they're doing to the LGBT community?
All right, good question. Brave man. I was a bit worried there. I thought you were kind of putting homosexuality into mental illness and you were going to have to answer that question yourself. I don't know what the government's going to do. My issue with what the church is doing with the gay community or with any marginalised community is a little contrary to what Jesus did. Jesus got himself into a few predicaments with the society. They weren't predicaments for him, because remember, they said, this guy hangs around with prostitutes and has lunch with, those that are collecting the taxes, and that was even worse than being a prostitute. You're a tax collector. But he wasn't there identifying with them. He was there identifying God's love for them. You see, we don't have any problem in our church, I don't think, with adulterers. And adultery is put up in a lot of those passages the same as murderers and gossipers. We tolerate gossipers, and we tolerate idolaters, and we tolerate adulterers. But when it comes to those from the different varieties of gay and bi communities, we struggle with Romans 3, where it's identified as a sinful behaviour. Just like gossiping and adultery. And I think the church needs to see beyond the behaviour to loving the person. And that's difficult for any community, whether it be the Coptic, the Baptists, the Anglicans. Some have got a far more defined response, which means there's no room to move. And I don't know where the Coptic church stands on that, but I know that you would not be welcome in most of other churches because of that exclusion. But we've got to also see that the scriptures say the same thing about people who gossip and people who commit adultery. So my own personal response is, you're welcome. Love you. As long as you don't try and promulgate what it is. Same thing with a gossiper or an adulterer. If you come to love Jesus, then come and worship with us and fellowship with us.
Just very briefly, sorry, more back for 2 seconds. Should mental illness should homosexuality still be considered a mental illness?
Oh, is it a mental illness? I can think of a number of times where it has been a learned behaviour. I can think of a number of times it's been a coerced behaviour. So they're not. I think it has a lot to do with the androgynous wash about day 11 in utero. So I think there's a lot of genetics involved. So no, I don't think it's a mental illness. Not at all. I think some of the behaviours are rather abnormal, but then join the club. You know? But that's a tricky one for every community. I don't believe in conversion therapy. Doesn't work. I've worked with many from the community, the gay and lesbian community, and that's usually the last thing we work on. There's so many other things to work on. It's never the big issue, really. Are we going to end on that note? Oh no, we got Fred?
A couple more.
Is that Fred? George. Sorry.
I just want to bring to light something that's having a direct impact on the psychology of the young people, and that's this. The social media, the interaction on Facebook has a changes that occurring that you refer to in all levels.
Yes.
Doesn't allow enough physical interaction. It actually pieces and penetrates directly into their mind and can play havoc with their perception of reality and impact on their spiritual beliefs and as a technology, it has its very good points, and one of it is that I found about you talks through it. Well, one is a lot of very bad that we need to arm ourselves against it. And I think the church may have a message to do here, how they can avoid some of the negative.
I think, it comes back, George, to the concept of community again.
Exactly. The community becomes very, very broad, but very, very isolated.
Yeah, well, it's a superficial community if it's only online. We're finding out more and more about the brain, but one of the things we're finding out about is what we call mirror neurons. That when you look at a person's eyes, you're actually making a far deeper commitment than any other commitment you can make. And so that's a problem with texting. You're actually creating a distance rather than a communication. Now that's talking to someone that's been around for over 70 years. You know, talk to my grandson who's, well, I've got a number of them, but my 6-year-old grandson, he says, "Grandpa, you're just old." Because I don't, you know, I took a long time to get a mobile phone. But the research coming out is that face-to-face communication is a warm, healing, and what they call a generous relationship, rather than being selfishly confined. And you know it can be very dangerous too. What can, you know, you get all sorts of nasty people involved. Yes?
I deal with a lot of young people.
Yeah.
And I can find straight away that the social media is a root of the mental problem.
Well, the researchers still have to come up with whether it's the root of the whole problem, but it's a tool that can be used, but you don't want to have the tool running your life. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed that. You touched on a point that I've often thought about, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit. And I'm not trying to generalize here as well, but you mentioned the point that sometimes God can allow us to experience, you know, certain mental conditions for His purposes. And you mentioned the example of Pharaoh, like, you know, he hardened his heart. I believe that even King Saul was affected by mental conditions purely because of him and so on. And even in my own life, I've even had times where, you know, there's been things in my life, and it actually caused me to be angry at God, and it kind of damaged my relationship with Him. Now, in hindsight, I look at that and I say, well, that was a consequence of my own actions. But is it purely out of God's wisdom that He would allow something to happen that could potentially damage my relationship with Him for His purposes? Or is it something more than that?
He's bigger than that. We can rant and rave and scream and holler at Him all the time. I mean, Elijah did it. Now Elijah got treated to a really spectacular expression of who God is. But he's, you know, when we get angry at Him, you know, He doesn't stomp His foot on us. He usually has a way already prepared for us to feel the pain of that and bring us back to Him. No, I don't. I mean, God doesn't carry a big stick. He's not some sort of cosmic policeman. So if we're feeling really upset with Him and damaged, psychologically we turn that projection. You know, we're really probably upset with ourselves and we want someone, and we can't, if we do it to someone around us, we're liable to get a big thick ear. So we put it out to God, we know it's safe. And He's bigger than that. Yeah. Are you again? Did you have another one? No? No? I thought you were creeping up. Come on.
I'm a medical practitioner.
Good. Have you met Father Antonius?
I've worked in different mental institutes, and hyper spirituality is one of the telltale signs that I've noticed in a lot of patients as to them deteriorating their mental health. My question is pretty simple. with the triangle that you put as to putting physical and psychological and spiritual pursuits, you approach them in that kind of order. Should we also, when we have our own disturbances, look into those kind of levels before we pursue spirituality?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if suddenly we feel these massive panic attacks, or we start to feel really anxious about something, remember that it's nearly all chemical. What have we done that's going to disturb the chemicals in our brain? And if we can't find something, then we probably need to go to prayer and ask the Lord to bring that to our understanding, because it could be a spiritual thing. It's not where I go, because we've got to be careful. Folks, everything is spiritual. Everything was given to us as a creation to enjoy and use to glorify God. So there's no secular and spiritual. There's no everything. Even our physical bodies have got a spiritual element because they were created for Him. So you can take that to an extreme. But no, I do that myself. Am I going to die tonight? No, it was just bad pizza. You can get emotionally tied into something when you can recognise there's another source. But if I know that I've done something sinful and I'm feeling very uncomfortable for it, I remember once as a little kid, now this is not going to go anywhere, right? We just moved house and I was boasting about our new house, and I said, I can throw a rock over the old house, easy. So I picked up a big ghoulie and I threw it right through the front window. So they turn up that night at my place and said, do you know anything about a stone that came through our front window? Me? No. I need to go to the bathroom, quick. And I got so physically ill with guilt. And I was 6 or 7. And I notice the same thing happens when I'm 72. If I do something I know is displeasing to the Father, I get really bad upset in my gut. Neurological thoughts transferred in, we call it somatization, thoughts transferred into the body can create all sorts of disturbance. So yes, I always do that myself. Are we done?
I think we have one more.
One more. All right. Bring it on.
Thank you, Dr. Barker, for your talk today. I have a question based on some experiences I've had. I serve as a Sunday school teacher, and I also have an occupation as a veterinarian. I've seen...
Is there a connection?
Yes.
Yeah.
The connection is that through all walks of life, both within my church community and outside, I've had a lot of people open up to me about their mental condition, whether it's been suicidal, being depressed, anxious, bipolar. So I've had a lot of experiences and I've been very open to receiving that from them. My question is, as you can see, there's a lot of general interest, and because our church community is slowly accepting, obviously, a lot of the benefits of science, but understanding there's a spiritual element as well.
Yep.
What can we do when someone does open up to us and when they're trusting us? What are the extra steps besides sitting and listening that we may encourage them to sort of seek that help?
Well, let me give you a couple of don'ts for a start. Don't play psychiatrist. So don't start digging as to where this came from or anything. Just accept it for what it is. All right? So lovingly accept it. And you've got to listen. There's nothing more healing than listening. Because that says, I respect you. I'm giving you my time and my full attention. Something people don't get very often. People are willing to pay me just to talk to me. I never had to say anything often. It was healing. So don't go psychiatrist on them. Don't ask them why. Don't be judgmental. Don't go, oh, yeah, well, you know, you should have done this. Another thing, don't start comparing. Oh, I had a brother-in-law that did this, or I had a brother-in-law, this is what he did. No, everybody's different. Everybody's got a story, but they're all different. So don't start saying, oh, well, I know what you've got to do because, you know, Mr. So-and-so down the road had this. Right, so they're the don'ts. What can you do? You can offer to pray for them, for a start. You can do it right then. Right? You can ask them to keep talking to you about it. And saying, if it feels really it's getting worse, then you need to see Father Antonius, or you need to go and see someone else, pastoral care in the church or something. You can be a conduit for them to get more professional help. But being open and honest with them, saying, wow, you know, this is overwhelming stuff, or wow, you know, I don't know much about bipolar, but, you know, this must be terrible. How does it affect you? Don't go into why or where did it come from. Just talk about the experience now. And then you ask, how can I help? I need a lift to the psychiatrist, or I need, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of asking. But if you feel that they've deteriorated, or they're being able to express their deterioration, you go, okay, I'll come with you, we'll go see the priest, or I'll go and see the GP or something with you. Usually not the vet, but still, you know. Yeah, but if you're the main contact, just be open. Just be open and prayerful and giving of yourself to them when they need it. It's called community. We keep coming back to that tonight. You know? And there are some people in your community here who are medically trained people. Others are prayers. Others have got other gifts that you can share. You know, when Paul writes to the Corinthians, in that chapter on spiritual gifts, he says, we can't get on without you. Everybody's got a gift, and we can't function. You may think you're a toenail, and you've got no place in the church. Hey, we all need a toenail, right? We all need each other. And you may find there are people in the church who will come and pray for that person. We'll take them to the psychiatrist. We'll provide them with food or that if they're unable to do it. So open it up. Father. Oh, another question.
No, just thank you. So, on behalf of everyone here tonight, can I say thank you so much for a fascinating evening. I certainly learned quite a lot listening to you today. And thank you for everyone for your wonderful questions, all those asked questions, and I'm sure probably people had even more questions. Without exception, they were all thought-provoking and really, really interesting. So thank you for that. It brought up some lovely, interesting discussion with Graham. So can we please all put our hands together and say